Hey guys, here to get into one of my all-time favorite films and stories overall. That is Into the Wild. I read this book a lot growing up, so particularly on some camping trips. So now I kind of hold on and preserve this film because I think the film takes me through it even more personally. So much is just this is just very relatable because it's about a man who's just basically seeking something beautiful in his life, to live an eternal beauty, and it turns out to be one of the most touching films ever made at kind of capturing that notion because this is a film that has a lot of good attention to just kind of like Americana detailing. I feel like there's a lot of desire, sometimes to just go out and just do something massive. This is a lot of the films. It's just a film that reminds me heavily thematically of what Taxi Driver explores, as far as a man who is out to do something heavy, but he's ultimately too naive in the face of it. This is, of course, a much less violent. This is like a pretty side of Taxi Driver, you could say. Because while that film is dark and harsh, this is kind of like a man literally living the eternal delusion bliss. That was a lot of what was going on in the year 2007. And again, I'm recognizing I was very depressed that year a wavelength was very depressing, I think, that year in art. That's become my favorite year of the 2000s because I think that's the year that really kind of comes to a summation of all that, sort of like dark optimism that had been brewing in the air, a lot of mystic optimism and an ultimate realization that everything's all right kind of thing, even when it's not, as everything I've been communicating before. But now it's like a more calm, refined, naturalistic, organic way of getting there. I think this year just really gets into a lot of the philosophy as far as just what it is to just endlessly be a drifter like that. And this is just perfect, honestly, because the character is extremely naive, and that's the thing. He's very in over his head throughout a lot of this, although his journey makes sense, and it's a very relatable feeling of like, yeah, this is literally, and honestly, I can relate to a lot of this throughout my 20s. Like, not every single action as far as like burning your car, like that's insane. Burning all this money you make, no way. But as far as just preferring the nature of just being outside and being in touch with, something of a greater force. So certainly a certain God, you could say. I'd rather be in tune with nature and tune with everything around me. It's sort of like the way everything communicates in nature, rather than too deep in this civilization. I certainly agree with that. And I found this deeply throughout my 20s. I think I found a journey. I think this film heavily, and then because I had moments where I was tempted to just go off and like hike all the Appalachian Trail, but then I realized, okay, that's like so ambitious. And sometimes you can get this kind of exact same pleasure in more simplistic ways that are more easygoing for yourself. You don't have to be this extremist, and that's kind of an idea a lot of film. I think that's what the year 2000 is. I think that's a year that a lot of films started adding up. I think perhaps in the year 2001 we got a lot of questions. In 2007, like all throughout the 2000s were building up to like the year 2007. I think because a lot of answers were kind of coming to a lot of filmmakers. Like Paul Thomas Anderson with There Blood, a lot of love and hate. You're kind of seeing the hippie ideas in filmmaking. This is certainly like a very young, naive kind of hippie. That's very relatable, honestly, because this is set in the early 90s. So, I mean, this is perfect as far as just like capturing a lot of the feeling of the 90s, but from a 2000s lens. It's sort of like, okay, kid, you keep dreaming kind of thing. Like, probably it reminds me of like an idealistic Kurt Cobain, of course, but this is like a lighter story overall than Kurt Cobain's story, but all the same, it does end about the same for him. This is really a delightful film. All the nature shots are just timeless. This is a film that most certainly does meet me very well with my. I'm like kind of looking at this film and assessing my relationship with nature and the way that built in the year 2018. A lot of that was naive because it was very detached from humanity. And that's a lot of what's going on with this character because that's the thing. You're kind of following on this journey and it seems like it's all perfect and it's all right. But ultimately, he is kind of in the face of something he doesn't quite understand what he's saying. I mean, this is all a very challenging kind of journey for him in a lot of ways. Like the journey challenges him a lot because he meets all these people, and the thing is, he's very well with people. It's not like he's awful at talking to people in the moment. What he struggles with is just consistency with the person. Like it's like he would rather just always be into with nature and kind of in a conversation with something of a greater force rather than just finding that through human interaction, which is the definition of an isolation. Can lead to all the madman stuff in the mountains. But this doesn't even get to the. This is a man who's just always on for as far as the journey goes, and this is just a man who's always seeking. But of course, in the end, it's like he can't settle with the person, and that in itself is something to always consider. Like, that's what I look at again in my 30s, especially now. I've lived in my 20s a lot like this, honestly. So it's like I can relate to a lot of this idea of just preferring this to with nature rather than attachment with other people. I think because when you get too deep, everyone's just got inherent flaws, and he's just too aware of it. So he wants to lose himself, it's like troubled childhood. All that can kind of build up to all that, adding up to everything for this character. But because he wants to find something better than what he ever knew before, and he does find that by way of exploration in nature. But very lonely, isolated man. He doesn't get close to anybody. He meets people, and it's always good. But it's just like even the people are questioning, why can't you just stay? Kind of thing. But it's almost like you could say it boils down to too adventurous. He's almost so adventurous and so free spirited that nothing can possibly stop him at any given second because trouble could actually come out. He never really lets it get to that. That's the thing. If you got too close, you get close to anybody, it's like trouble will eventually fly right out of you. This is sort of a perfect film at exploring that, in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it's like not ever getting too close to anybody ultimately leads to, a lot of things that can happen. It's just like sometimes you'll realize your own naivete at the worst possible times. Like, oh, I could have grown in that naivete had I gotten close and cared about the person, and loved the person. That's sort of like foundation right there. I could have grown up if I had just sat down and actually cried. Again, I'm coming back to that foundation of cry about it rather than face it acting like it isn't there. Because if you cry about it, it actually fizzles out. You tap into literal transcendence, I feel, in the end by doing it. Instead of and then let that mystic optimism that you build up from it kind of be what drives you force. You're forcing when you're out facing the world. But there's a man who's always facing the world. He doesn't ever rest. I think rest in between is, frequently seeing, it's like keep that balance of rest in between. Because, you go too crazy bananas all the time. Literally, like you just think you're top of the world. It's like don't drink the water all the time just because it looks tempting to drink it. Don't eat that berry because literally that'll kill you because it could be poisonous. And out in nature, not really having any other perspectives that live to that. And then in the very end, of course, that defines what he sees, which is that happiness is only real when it's shared with another person. That's a fundamental flaw that's unspoken for a lot of men. It's like there could be a point where it's like, okay, rotting, fizzling inside in spirit, and you almost see a point where he comes to this point. So that's why this is a very important film and story to preserve, because I think as I get older, of course, when I'm young, I know that this is a dark thing, and this isn't ultimately a man you should look up to necessarily, but it's just fascinating because he represents the core of man's spirit, a walking force in a lot of ways. But then as you get older, you kind of start to see the story as more of a young kid who gets in over his head over a situation, basically. But you go along with it because everything about what he finds in that idealism is perfect. It is great. And it is true, like, to a person in a lot of ways. But yeah, all the landscapes are perfect here, and all the directing here it's directed by Sean Penn of all people. That's just crazy. I do love Sean Penn. I do love him. I think he's a pretty great actor. He's awesome in this and stuff like Tree of Life, Mystic River. I think he's great. But this is a film that just really is immersive, and he really does capture like scenic beauty, as well as just this loose episodic structure. That's what really captures me the most about it, where you're just hovering around like an ensemble cast of characters, and it's just kind of one by one. Like you just kind of get different kinds of people, like in all these interactions. And it feels like I'm on like a cross country camp trip endlessly. It's this, I think that's the feeling I'm realizing is timeless. You can go there endlessly. You can always run. You can always do things. You can always get out in nature and embrace nature. That's what it kind of comes down to. But Emile Hirsch really plays this part perfectly. Because this is most certainly easily my favorite thing he's done. He had a cameo Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That's great, but this is definitive. I feel like it seems like he was born for this role. Because he's just. You can always see it in his eyes. You can always see it in his presence that he's always thirsty for an adventure in his life. And whenever he goes on an adventure, that journey just is so perfect. But he's like kind of like, here's the reason I think he wants to not get too close to me. Because you get the characters like Vince Vaughn, where it's like they're just talking, rambling about like society, which is cheesy, which I'm like admitting, because it's like this kid. It literally can be corny to act. It almost comes off edgelordy when you just kind of blindly agree with the man. You might have the right enthusiasm, but then you get into a moment where you're just out at the bar, and then all of a sudden it's just like you're just saying all these things that just really would have been better off not being said. Feels like, in a lot of ways. But then you get all these other scenes where it's just like he's just roaming out in the city, just kind of feeling no different than a homeless man along the way. I think that's a really interesting notion of embracing the light and dark of the adventure. He's a man who's always out for truth. Like to him, truth matters more than anything. And again, he's just on an endless journey, and he can never sit still for a second. And it's interesting. I could say, but I think he lays out why it's not worth being that much of acting much of an extremist. I like to kind of, it's like inward extremist, you could say, like build up moods. It's like a perspective that comes with just It's just almost treating. It's almost, I think, look, and again, this could be what's cold about it all, but it's like you're kind of looking at life as a game, literally. That's sort of what's kind of hit me in an interesting kind of way. It's like, okay, life is a game, and literally, yeah, just like, do I like it do you like how it is, basically? Modify it. And if you don't look at moods like, they're like potents that are meant to be ingrained and, shifted and endlessly. And you find the beauty in all those, the tears are necessary to get there. I've seen it's important. But yeah, there's just a lot of like, again, he's no hero. I mean, of course, there's a lot of moments where it's cringy. I think again, that reminds me of that Taxi Driver contrast. I certainly feel a similarity because they're both very naive, and by that, you get in moments where they're just. A lot of people might question like, what's heroic about it? There's nothing heroic necessarily, but it's just he's just always on an adventure, basically, and that in itself is like a man's spirit too. And yeah, there's always just interesting conversations. Like, I don't think all this is meant to be like a very flattering time. I mean, there's a lot of moments like Kristen Stewart's character too, where it's just like the kind of advice he drops. It's just like it's perfect, but it's so fast paced and it never stops. It's just like cheesy, literally, really cheesy. But yeah, he's just like but ultimately he's like a troubled loner. I mean, he most certainly has some good intentions, throughout this whole thing. I mean, I think he was just out because intentions is just to lose yourself in nature. I think, that's good intentions in itself. Be lost in the wonder, endless depth of wonder, of wondering. That's kind of what he starts to see. But along the way, the extreme philosophies that come around are just really representative of a deep-seated trouble. And again, it's that he never found out how to truly get close with another person. Which, okay, yeah, yeah, you got me. So that's. We'll get there though. Figure it out how. I know it's going to come. I feel it. And prayer. It's something a love force, I mean, just having that love force in itself is enough for me to live forever. You can find another person to share, but that's important because I truly see the foundation of loneliness and like letting your soul rot. That hits me very important. Seriously, it's like hard, and it's like yikes. When you know what that feels like, that force feels like, yeah, you want to fight to live, which is what this film kind of does have to it. It's like, okay, I just want to fight to live like a trooper right now. Because his spirit is so true. Not heroic, but it's just true, basically, I think is what it comes down to. The man, as far as just a sense of adventurism is maybe the most important way for a man's soul to be truly guided to the right places, and always. But again, the coldness is, I have to question it through like so much music and film and all throughout the 60s throughout now. It's just, it's like, what are the limits where it's just too far, like to the point where you're just inhuman, that's no good, ultimately for you. Your soul in the end, it does as a rotten feeling kicks in of not sharing memories, not expanding upon something within other people outside of, a very, very one-noted nest. So yeah, I mean, a lot of that is still weighing on me. The challenges to be faced are worth it because those dark emotions are meant to be kindled into something, sweeter. It takes some of those, whatever it takes to get there, honestly. But and this is a film. Like, I hear like a lot of people don't like this film because they say I hear a lot of cheesy, maybe too over emotional. But this is the ultimate kind of emotional expressionism, like what was going on in the 2000s in general, which is again kind of communicating that mystic optimism, maybe looking at foundation of like, oh man, like if only sort of feeling. But yeah, it's just quite a masterpiece, and it really just feels like an epic journey throughout 2.5 hour experience. So it's quite an epic, and this is a film that I don't know when the mood, it often hits me around like May and June. It hits me every year since like 2018. It's like something about this film particularly just hits the spirit of like this is true, and it does question a lot of intense, thoughts and questions, philosophy. Like that's something who doesn't want to stop living in that plane. And that's the thing. I look at it, I'm like, wow. I mean, again, it feels like that Kurt Cobain influence. It's just like, man. Like, I think that's maybe what grabbed me about Nirvana. It's like they're taking on the worst subject matter and whatnot, but it's the sense of adventurism that grabs. Perhaps that's grunge in a nutshell. All that, it's like all the adventurism living inside of it, and how a person can just live in that, in a lot of ways. But of course, this is important because I think the foundation of nature is just endlessly important throughout the making process. You certainly, I think every person has a personal relationship with nature that's being built and expanded upon, but it's important to not lose yourself to a certain level, you could say. This is definitely a film that, yeah, it just feels like an ultimate expression of just human existence and really just something perfect, honestly. I really love this film. It's very inspired, and it does, I would say, influence me much like how Taxi Driver is, where it's just like, I think what you could say about that film is, that's a rotten place to be at ultimately. But there is something, I think, that is like an unspoken cool about having this passion to do and dedication to do something at all costs, you could say. And Into the Wild is like that too. But this is more innocent and pure because this is just beautiful. I mean, yeah, he's just really on this full journey. And like, again, the little details that's revealed throughout the nature scenes are just really, really like in tune, and it really does capture something that's, yeah, perfect. It reminds me a lot of the foundation of what like Terrence Malick and Hal Ashby is doing, which is, I think it feels like a combination of those two directors in a lot of ways. We got Malick's beauty of eye for nature, which is just really strong and very true. While, yeah, you have, yeah, like I love that so much. That's Malick, but I think Hal Ashby is more in the humanism. I think because he's certainly looking at people from a very glass-eyed onion, but also from an emotional lens too, which again, very 2000s. Hal Ashby certainly feels like it's like the 60s and the 2000s just kind of got together. Its own kind of way, very Wes Anderson too. But that's Emil Hirsch. I mean, he really is just. I think this is a very important film, to me. And I'm not going to say it's important to everybody, because I certainly understand that this is naive. That's the point. And maybe Taxi Driver is better at celebrating the darkness. Not celebrating. No, that's the wrong word. Just portraying the darkness in a man, while this is celebrating the life of the naive kind of outlook a little more. While it does kind of also just, yeah, like you don't judge these, like you do judge these characters. You might, it's like everyone has different when they watch this. I don't personally. I've been around people who have, and I think that's an interesting notion too. Because I like to kind of observe how it's like, yeah, I see what you're I see what you're saying, kind of thing. Because it's almost like you don't know why that would be annoying, but it's like you put yourself in a loud place, and suddenly everyone, like you can almost build up a certain momentum in yourself, and you'll just say things that's almost too agreeable with everything around you in a way. It's almost like you would be smart in this typically, but it's almost like you get in a moment and it just feels like yeah, because it's almost like maybe the design, because you're out of touch with society, so you kind of talk to the person and like literally conversate. It's almost like so nice that you're just going to go too deep in a way that's not going to just sway you in weird places at times. That's what he sees ultimately. But at the same time, at the end, he needed this. The person he meets in the end, Hal Holbrook's character. He's the one who ultimately lays the true foundation on Chris McCandless. Like, this is actually what he needed right here. He got it. He was like a grandfather figure for him, simply. And it's like Chris couldn't even sit still for that. And that's what caught up to him. I think in the end, that was his moral decision. That's kind of like, okay, no, kind of in the end. Because that everything before, it's like, it's almost reasonable enough. It's like, okay, like they're kind of doing their thing. He's doing his thing. Okay, that's understandable, perhaps. But in this case, I think he really needed that. That's like, wow, like there was no reason to run away from that whatsoever. He had words of wisdom that was actually true while they're sitting on the mountain. And it also just kind of goes into just like, the kid's just not really listening. You can tell he's just, here's the kind of basis that's cold-hearted. It's like preferring to just drift off endlessly over having a good-hearted conversation with a person who has superior knowledge to you, but he's actually giving you what you need, because he gets you better maybe than you get yourself. That's the kind of person that you should listen to. Maybe they understand you more than you understand yourself. That's a very big thing. It's like there are plenty of people. I feel like at this point you probably understand my soul better than better than I understand my soul. I'm confused a lot of times, but that's how Chris McCandless is. But perhaps there's denial going on. Like he's not really confessing to his intense coldness. He just lives in philosophy because it comes from trouble, childhood typically. I'm not, but this is kind of one of those, it's just extremists. That's what happens. I think whenever there's something trouble living inside a person, that's where a maximalist is going to have to kind of come out of the person. And this man is most certainly like a maximalist, and I'm kind of realizing a lot of foundation of maximalism versus minimalism. I was certainly around a lot of maximalism I'm realizing, and I think that's what lives. It's like a minimalism I see as the wiser foundation. Again, this man perhaps is like a good representation of minimalism and maximalism having a conversation. Minimalism is kind of able to provide the most honest, pure advice of love and truth. Maximalism is just too busy drifting off to really pay too much attention. So it's like there's good and there's like, I'm not going to say the kid's really a good. It's almost like he's not even really that good of a kid. That's the thing about it. But he does nothing wrong. So it's almost a contradiction in itself, but because that's the foundation of a man's spirit. You just kind of saw a man who's very in tune with God. You could say his own definition of God. But that's really what it came down to. It's like he didn't need to confine himself to not religion. My gosh, this is going to would have been horrible in any sort of religion. It's like he just needed to simply have a simple love in his life, a simple kind. This is one of the most fascinating films. And I understand that. Perhaps don't recommend this film to just anybody, because I understand that this might be the pure definition of a naive idealist, you could say, which is very close to home in a lot of ways. So perhaps this film is just so far into that that this is like a personal film for me in so many ways. I think whenever I recommend or talk about this film, and the novel too, it's like I'm kind of going to be careful with the crowd. I realize, but that's good. And I think hearing all this feedback does add up. You really are kind of hearing like, oh wow, I do that. They judge me. They would judge me if I were in the heat of the moment acting like that. But I'm just doing it because I'm a little detached from humanity, basically. If I were closer, that's the goal from the 30s. It's got to be closer into everything that's kind of happening. Madness has to be met with the society and humanity. And I realize the best music and art is capable of bringing you to that film. But yeah, that's Into the Wild. Don't recommend it just to, but if you're, and I would say the kind of person I would recommend it to is just like, certainly an adventurous, hyper adventurous, free spirited person. That's the foundation, I think, right there. And I kind of see myself as like a mentally adventurous person that I prefer to see like plenty of superior, adventurous-hearted minds, but then read the characterization of how that can apply to your life. Like it's the life lesson attitude. It's like that's again modifying your emotions. That's life lesson at the end, and it's like trying to figure out how to express, what it is to be to view things as a life lesson in so many different ways. Into the Wild comes not highly recommended. And perhaps reading the book first might have been a huge foundation of this too. So I read the book first, and I recognize that perhaps if you watch the film detached from how the book portrays this story, it does seem like it's maybe it may be too easy to judge it. It might become easy to judge, I think, because it's like, I think from the book you understand the trouble. It's like, okay, I would do that too in that given situation. But if you just look at that, like, yeah, okay, he's literally burning a car, he's burning his money, and I recognize that that seriously pisses people off. Of course, I wouldn't do that. I'm not saying that, but people would do that, and that's interesting because he's an extremist. He's such an extremist that it's like no money, no cars, just nature forever, basically. But it kind of comes down to an interesting thing of like, what was the point if you couldn't share with anybody? Literally, that's the foundation right there. Living all this, doing all this, but you had no one to share with. Again, The Early Blood has a similar thing. That's the cold side of what Into the Wild is doing, which is like, you don't want to be like Daniel Plainview, because that literally is, like kind of a continuing force of what can happen to like Christmas candles. He gets so cold. And he realizes he has, because I think when you hit your 30s, it just intuitively feels like you need to build something for yourself truly, for the foundation of love, spirit. That's, throwing these things out. I'm going to keep doing it, but eventually, like, it has to be built, so it can be, the impact can be met, and perhaps that's what's maximalist about it, but it has to be understood and grounded. Minimalist is wiser. I'm, certainly seeking plenty of minimalist-minded people remainder of my life. Because I certainly see the wiser, and I'd like to give it to the wiser person. That's the thing. Whenever I recognize something that feels like, yes, you know more than I do about this, I want to just listen rather than yap too much. I'll do it on my own. I yap in my own time, but I'm not going to yap around the people I want to be around the most, typically. That's just kind of what a lot of modern art in 2010s have particularly communicated. A lot of anxiety ultimately lives in a lot of 60s through the 90s. As much as I love everything going on in those decades, I think 2010s perhaps had a unique foundation of just soothing out the anxiety, just like relax, chill. 2007s, I think, where this all really started. Like all these great masterpieces came out. Like this film just happened to be just under a lot of that, like stuff like Assassin's and Jesse James. I mean, No Country for Old Men, that's another just genius. All-time masterpiece, certainly top 20 of all time. So is There'll Be Blood, and Into the Wild comes pretty close too, because this is just a really personal film. And It's completely original. I've never seen one called because that's Sean Penn. Like again, of all people, it's just like it feels like I think it wouldn't kind of the same impact if Paul Thomas Anderson directed this film. This is meant to feel cinematic in a very different kind of way, more like Planet Earth kind of directing, where you just feel like it's almost a random kind of personality, but it ultimately is just truthful to the core of the story. And perhaps Sean Penn could just really relate to all this, like because again, it's like being an older person, but realizing there's something preferential about the youthful outlook. And that's the way I realize it's always going to be this way. It's like you always kind of want to feel a little bit like how Chris McCandless is, because he has like all these quotes and foundations of just like, it's not about living to be strong, but to feel strong. And yeah, that's kind of what it comes down to. I think 2010s onward, 2020s, I feel like it all has to come down to that. You want to, that's mystic optimism, feeling strong. This man certainly gets mystic optimism. And that's Chris McCandless. I mean, he's one of a kind force to be reckoned with, for most certainly. This film is highly recommended. If you are a highly spirited adventurous, I don't recommend this if you're not, because looking in the world like this all the time, because I think this could be a little bit irritating, because the kid does mess. But that's where it's like, yeah, okay, it makes sense. But that's Into the Wild, one of a kind.